Eye on Culture is sponsored by the Ignatowicz Family Foundation.
Eye on Culture. One of the great mysteries of human existence is the puzzle of artistic and creative individuality. How does it happen that a person, simply living his or her life, seemingly just one of many similar others, manages to define in words, colors and contours, or sounds or gestures, something that no one else has been able to express or give rise to in art? And how does one individual, in creating his or her own artistic vision, come to speak for an entire group of people? Particularly touching and heartwarming are those situations in which an extraordinarily creative individual ascends unexpectedly, rising from humble beginnings or circumstances, and through the miracle of fate and the force of his or her talent and dedicated work, comes to represent the spirit of a nation, sometimes even becoming a universal symbol. In Ukrainian culture, the archetype of such an artist is Taras Shevchenko, a serf who became a national poet. However, Shevchenko is not the sole example. Take the case of Mykhailo Boichuk. He was born in 1882 into a poor peasant family in the Ternopil region in western Ukraine. Could anyone have guessed at the time that he would grow up to become one of the most influential Ukrainian painters of the 20th century? As a young boy, Boichuk was enraptured by colorful church paintings and icons, as well as folk art, but understood well that he would need a miracle to avoid a lifetime of working the land in the footsteps of his ancestors. But a miracle did indeed occur. First, a newspaper ad that Boichuk's teacher had taken out on his behalf was answered by the artist Julian Pankevich, who then took on Boichuk as an apprentice. Within a few years, Pankevich, impressed by the talent of his young apprentice, helped him get a scholarship for study at the Krakow Academy of Arts. The meaningful coincidences did not end there, however, as fate had more in store for Boichuk. He met with Polish intellectual Stanisław Witkiewicz, the father of famous writer Witkacy, and made such a positive impression that Witkiewicz wrote a recommendation letter on his behalf to a friend. That friend, as it turns out, was, at the time, the most generous and forward-thinking benefactor of Ukrainian culture in Galicia, Metropolitan Andrij Szeptycki. Szeptycki knew, perhaps better than most in Galicia, the crucial significance of high culture in the process of the formation of the modern Ukrainian nation. Szeptycki was the founder of the National Museum in Lviv, and he also consistently and wholeheartedly supported talented artists at his own expense. Owing to Szeptycki's generosity, Boichuk was able to pursue his studies, first in Munich and then in the city of his dreams, Paris. And in Paris, Boichuk proved once and for all that the positive turns of fate and the hopes that others had placed in him were fully justified. Paris is where Boichuk crystallized his artistic style, and in the end, it is the place where his exceptional pedagogical abilities and charisma came to the fore, where he became the central figure for a group of followers, and where the first studio school was founded in his name. Boichuk would have still several more schools in his lifetime, and most of his pupils for the whole of their lives recalled him fondly, respectfully calling him teacher with a capital T. This respect did not merely emanate from the fact that he was the center of the groups of artists that he had assembled and designated their principles and direction of development. In the tradition of the Renaissance, Boichuk essayed to create a master's workshop, both in form of education and style of work. Assembled around their master, the student artists did everything together. They lived together, jointly studied modern and classical art, prepared their own paints according to traditional recipes and methods that Boichuk had researched, and created artworks, most notably vast frescoes. And while Boichuk developed a style for his school on the basis of new trends in the avant-garde, he grounded his artistic vision in traditional forms, in particular Byzantine art, the painting of the Quattrocento period of the early Renaissance, and Ukrainian icon painting and folk painting and ornamentation, both of which were tightly interconnected with the two prior traditions mentioned. Art critics, including the leading Paris critic Guillaume Apollinaire, praised Boichuk's Paris school in 1910, when, under the name Rénovation de l'Art Byzantine, Revival of Byzantine Art, his students took part in a show in the Salon des Indépendants. In Ukraine, this style was named Boichukism, and it soon began to be considered a national style in Ukrainian art, notably in fresco painting, particularly after Boichuk became one of the founding professors of the Ukrainian State Academy of Arts in KU, and later a professor at the KU Art Institute. In both of these institutions, Boichuk did not give in to or follow pedagogical stereotypes, and continued to be a teacher with a capital T, a master teaching through joint work effort, group outings to museums, and a hands-on approach to leadership and study. Because of his teaching methods, Boichuk came under the scrutiny and criticism of Communist Party officials, who felt that he had far too much influence on his students. Among these students were extraordinary creative talents, such as Ivan Padalka, Vasil Sedlar, Oksana Pavlenko, and others. Soviet apparatchiks also criticized the style of Boichukism, which rejected realism in favor of deeply philosophical iconic spirituality, and depicted scenes of everyday life imbued with a timeless, quasi-sacred dimension. Unrefined and in-cult critics disapproved of Boichuk's art, seemingly on the basis of its focus on Ukrainian traditions, although Boichuk himself was quite outspoken about not being a proponent of exclusively national art, asserting that fundamentally great art must always be universal in nature. And a good indicator of the sincerity of his beliefs was the fact that many of his followers were not Ukrainian. In Boichuk's first studio school in Paris, most of his students were Polish. In their works, they successfully meshed Boichukism with Polish traditions of art. Also, the Jewish Boichukist Manuel Shechtman created masterful compositions in the style of Boichukism, incorporating motifs from the history of his own nation. In general, at the beginning of the 20th century, all of the underpinnings existed for the style of Ukrainian Mykhailo Boichuk to claim a leading place in its branch of world art, similarly as soon happened with the works of Mexican Diego Rivera. However, the Stalinist regime stopped this movement in its tracks, not only by murdering Boichuk and the most prominent Boichukists during its 1930s terror campaign, but also by barbarously destroying most of their works, thousands of paintings and frescoes which today we know only from photographs. Recently, authoritative books about Boichukism finally began to be published. A good example is the album by art scholar Yaroslav Kravchenko, published in KU by the publishing house Майстерня Книги, under the title Школа Михайла Бойчука, 37 imen, The School of Mykhailo Boichuk, 37 names. Kravchenko himself is the son of one of Boichuk's students, Ochim Kravchenko. However, Boichukism and its impact on Ukrainian art deserve still much more scholarly attention. After all, it is remarkable that, in spite of the brutal destruction of the Boichukist movement and most of its artistic legacy, this tradition turned out to be extraordinarily influential in Ukrainian art. Already in the 1960s, at a time when it was barely allowed in the Soviet Union to speak about Boichuk, or the crackdown on his school, the legacy of this peasant from the Ternopil region, who became a true Renaissance-style master artist, was key to the emergence of a new wave of Ukrainian art, the 1960s generation in Ukraine, the so-called Шестидесятники. But we will discuss this 1960s generation another time. On behalf of Dr. Marko Robert Stech, I'm Tania Stech. See you next time on Eye on Culture.
Очима культури спонсороване фундацією родини Ігнатович.
Очима культури.